In the basement archives of the Royal Maritime Museum in Greenwich, Dr. Helena Blackthorne carefully lifted the glass plate from its protective case. As the head of the museum's photographic preservation department, she had examined thousands of historical images, but this particular photograph had been waiting for her attention for nearly 3 months. The acquisition paperwork indicated it had been donated by the estate of Captain Edmund Harwick, a retired naval officer who had passed away the previous winter. The photograph was remarkably well preserved for its age, the silver gelatin process having captured extraordinary detail despite being taken in 1887. It showed a group of 12 men standing on the deck of what appeared to be a research vessel, their faces weathered by sun and salt air, but clearly visible in the crisp Antarctic light. They wore the heavy wool coats and fur-lined caps typical of polar expeditions of that era, and behind them, the rigging and masts of their ship created a complex pattern of lines and shadows. Helena positioned the photograph under her magnifying lens and began her standard documentation process. Each expedition photograph required careful cataloguing, not just for historical accuracy, but because these images often contained the only visual record of men who had ventured into some of the most dangerous and unexplored regions of the Earth. Many of these expeditions had ended in tragedy, with entire crews lost to the ice, and sometimes a single photograph was all that remained to tell their story. As she examined the faces in the group, Helena noted the typical composition of a polar expedition crew. There was clearly a ship's captain, distinguished by his naval uniform and commanding posture in the center of the group. To his right stood what appeared to be the expedition's scientific leader, holding what looked like surveying equipment. The others were arranged in the informal but hierarchical manner common to such photographs, with officers and scientists in the front row and crew members behind. But as Helena continued her examination, something caught her attention. One man, standing slightly apart from the others on the far left of the photograph, seemed somehow different from his companions. While the other men looked directly at the camera with the serious expressions typical of the era's long exposure times, this individual appeared to be looking slightly off to the side, as if his attention had been caught by something beyond the photographer's view. More intriguingly, his clothing was subtly different from the others. While the rest of the group wore the standard expedition gear of the 1880s, this man's coat appeared to be of a different cut, and there was something about the fabric that seemed inconsistent with the period. Helena adjusted her magnifying lens and leaned closer. The man's face was partially obscured by shadow, but what she could see of his features struck her as somehow anachronistic, though she couldn't immediately identify why. Helena reached for the expedition documentation that had accompanied the photograph. According to the paperwork, this was the crew of the HMS Endurance, which had departed from Portsmouth in March 1887 under the command of Captain Reginald Ashworth. The expedition had been funded by the Royal Geographic Society with the goal of establishing weather stations along the Antarctic coast and conducting magnetic field measurements in the Southern Ocean. She found the ship's manifest, a detailed list of every person aboard the vessel when it departed England. Captain Ashworth was listed, along with his first officer, the expedition's chief scientist, Dr. Nathaniel Moorcock, the ship's doctor, the cook, and 7 crew members. 12 men total, which matched the number of individuals in the photograph. Helena began comparing the faces in the photograph to the names on the manifest, using physical descriptions from the crew records where available. Captain Ashworth was easy to identify, his distinctive beard and naval bearing matching the central figure in the photograph. Dr. Moorcock, described in the records as a tall, thin man with spectacles, was clearly the figure holding the surveying equipment. One by one, she was able to match the faces to the names on the manifest, until she reached the man on the far left, the one whose appearance had initially caught her attention. According to her process of elimination, this should be Thomas Whitmore, listed as an able seaman aged 26 from Liverpool. But when Helena consulted Whitmore's physical description in the crew records, nothing matched. Whitmore was described as having red hair and a prominent scar across his left cheek from a childhood accident, while the man in the photograph had dark hair and no visible scarring. Helena double-checked her work, going through the manifest again and re-examining each face in the photograph, but her conclusion remained the same. There were 13 men in the photograph, but only 12 names on the ship's records. One man who had clearly been present when the photograph was taken had never officially been aboard the HMS Endurance. This discovery was unusual enough to warrant further investigation. Helena had encountered discrepancies in historical records before, but they were typically due to clerical errors or damaged documentation. Finding a person who appeared in a photograph but had no corresponding record was far more rare and potentially significant from a historical perspective. She decided to research the HMS Endurance expedition more thoroughly. Using the museum's extensive maritime archives, she began searching for additional documentation about the voyage. What she found was an expedition that had been marked by unusual circumstances from the very beginning. The HMS Endurance had been a converted merchant vessel, refitted for polar exploration with reinforced hull plating and additional heating systems. The expedition had been organized somewhat hastily, with funding approved by the Royal Geographic Society only 6 weeks before departure. This was unusual, as most polar expeditions required years of planning and preparation. More intriguingly, Helena discovered that the expedition had returned to England nearly 4 months ahead of schedule. The official report, filed by Captain Ashworth upon their return in November 1887, cited unexpected ice conditions and equipment failures as the reasons for the early termination of their mission. However, the report was notably brief and lacking in the detailed scientific observations that were typically expected from such expeditions. Helena found newspaper accounts of the expedition's return, and these painted a picture of an expedition that had encountered significant difficulties. Several crew members had been hospitalized upon their return, suffering from what the newspapers described as severe nervous exhaustion. Dr. Moorcock, the expedition's chief scientist, had reportedly refused to speak to journalists about their discoveries, claiming that the scientific data required extensive analysis before any conclusions could be drawn. Most significantly, Helena discovered that one crew member had not returned with the ship. According to the records, Thomas Whitmore, the able seaman whose description didn't match the man in the photograph, had died during the expedition. The official cause of death was listed as accidental drowning, with the incident occurring during a routine supply run to one of their weather stations. But if Thomas Whitmore had died during the expedition, who was the 13th man in the photograph, and why had his presence aboard the ship never been officially recorded? Helena decided to examine the photograph more closely, using the museum's advanced digital enhancement equipment. Under high magnification, she was able to discern details that weren't visible to the naked eye. The mysterious 13th man's clothing, which had seemed subtly different from his companions, proved to be even more anachronistic than she had initially realized. While the other men wore wool coats with bone or wooden buttons typical of the 1880s, this individual's coat appeared to have metal fastenings of a type that hadn't been manufactured until the early 20th century. More puzzling still, the fabric itself seemed to have a weave pattern that was inconsistent with 19th century textile production. Helena also noticed that the man's boots were different from those worn by the rest of the crew. While the others wore the heavy leather boots standard for polar expeditions of the era, this individual's footwear appeared to be made from a material that looked almost synthetic, with a sole pattern that seemed far too advanced for the 1880s. But perhaps most disturbing was what Helena discovered when she enhanced the image of the man's face. While the other crew members showed the effects of months at sea, with weathered skin and the gaunt appearance common to men living on expedition rations, this individual looked remarkably well-fed and healthy. His skin appeared smooth and unmarked by the harsh conditions that had clearly affected his companions. Helena printed out the enhanced images and spread them across her desk, studying each detail. The more she examined the evidence, the more convinced she became that something extraordinary had occurred during the HMS Endurance expedition, something that had been deliberately concealed from the official records. She decided to research the individual crew members more thoroughly, hoping to find some clue that might explain the presence of the mysterious 13th man. Starting with Captain Ashworth, she discovered that he had been a respected naval officer with over 20 years of experience in both military and exploratory voyages. After returning from the Antarctic expedition, however, his career had taken an unusual turn. Rather than continuing with naval service or leading additional expeditions, Captain Ashworth had retired from active duty and moved to a remote estate in Scotland. He had become something of a recluse, rarely appearing in public and declining all invitations to speak about his Antarctic experiences. When he died in 1923, his personal papers had been sealed by his estate and were not available to researchers. Dr. Nathaniel Moorcock, the expedition's chief scientist, had similarly withdrawn from public life after returning from Antarctica. Despite being a respected researcher, with several published papers on magnetic field variations, he had never published any findings from the HMS Endurance expedition. Helena found records indicating that he had suffered what his contemporaries described as a nervous breakdown in early 1888, just months after the expedition's return. The pattern was consistent among the surviving crew members. Those who had returned from the expedition had either died within a few years of their return or had withdrawn from society, refusing to discuss their experiences in Antarctica. It was as if the entire crew had been traumatized by something they had encountered during their voyage, something so disturbing that they had collectively chosen to remain silent about it. Helena's research was interrupted by a knock on her office door. Her research assistant, James Pemberton, entered carrying a stack of documents and wearing an expression of barely contained excitement. "Dr. Blackthorne," he said, "I've been following up on your request for additional information about the HMS Endurance expedition. I think I've found something significant." James placed the documents on Helena's desk and opened to a page marked with several bookmarks. "These are the personal diaries of Sir Charles Whitfield, who was the president of the Royal Geographic Society in 1887. I found them in the Society's private archives, and they contain several entries about the Endurance expedition that aren't in the official records." Helena examined the diary entries, which were written in the precise handwriting typical of Victorian gentlemen. The first relevant entry was dated 2 weeks before the expedition's departure and expressed Sir Charles's concerns about the hasty organization of the voyage. The entry read, "Met with Captain Ashworth today regarding the Antarctic expedition. While I admire his enthusiasm, I remain troubled by the rushed nature of this undertaking. The funding was approved with unusual speed, and several members of the Society's board seemed remarkably eager to see the expedition depart as soon as possible. When I inquired about the specific scientific objectives, the responses were vague and unsatisfactory." A subsequent entry, dated just days before the HMS Endurance's departure, was even more revealing. "Attended the final briefing for the Antarctic expedition. Most peculiar meeting. Dr. Moorcock presented what he claimed were magnetic field readings from previous expeditions, but the data seemed inconsistent with established scientific knowledge. When I questioned the accuracy of these readings, both Moorcock and Captain Ashworth became defensive and insisted that the expedition would investigate these anomalies. But it was the final entry related to the expedition that truly caught Helena's attention. Written shortly after the HMS Endurance's unexpected return, Sir Charles had recorded, "Captain Ashworth visited my office today, ostensibly to deliver the expedition's final report. However, he spent most of our meeting insisting that certain aspects of their discoveries must never be made public. When I pressed him for details, he became agitated and claimed that they had encountered something in Antarctica that challenged fundamental assumptions about the natural world. He repeatedly mentioned a 13th member of their party, someone who had joined them during the expedition, though he refused to explain how this was possible." Helena felt a chill run down her spine as she read this passage. Sir Charles Whitfield's diary provided the first independent confirmation that there had indeed been a 13th person associated with the expedition, someone whose presence had clearly disturbed Captain Ashworth enough that he had felt compelled to mention it to the president of the Royal Geographic Society. James pointed to another section of the diary. "There's more, Dr. Blackthorne." Sir Charles made several attempts to follow up with Captain Ashworth about the expedition's findings, but he was consistently rebuffed. "Look at this entry from December 1887. Helena read the indicated passage. "My repeated requests for a detailed scientific report from the Antarctic expedition have been met with evasion and delay. Dr. Moorcock has submitted a brief summary that contains virtually no useful data, claiming that most of their instruments were damaged by extreme weather conditions. However, I have heard rumors from other sources that the expedition made discoveries of significant importance, discoveries that are being deliberately suppressed." The diary entries painted a picture of an expedition that had encountered something extraordinary, something that had so disturbed the participants that they had chosen to conceal their findings rather than share them with the scientific community. The presence of a mysterious 13th man, someone who had apparently joined the expedition after their departure from England, was clearly connected to whatever they had discovered in Antarctica. Helena decided that she needed to examine the photograph even more closely, using the museum's most advanced imaging technology. She took the original glass plate to the conservation laboratory, where specialized equipment could reveal details invisible to conventional examination. Under infrared imaging, which could penetrate surface layers and reveal underlying details, the photograph yielded new information. The mysterious 13th man's clothing, which had appeared unusual under normal light, proved to be even more anachronistic when examined with infrared. The fabric showed characteristics that were completely inconsistent with 19th century manufacturing, displaying a uniformity of weave and dye that wouldn't have been possible with the technology available in 1887. More disturbing still, infrared imaging revealed that the man's skin had an unusual reflective quality, as if it was somehow different in composition from that of his companions. While the other crew members showed the normal infrared signatures of human skin, this individual's face and hands reflected the infrared light in a pattern that Helena had never seen before. But perhaps most shocking was what the infrared imaging revealed about the background of the photograph. Behind the group of men, barely visible in normal light, the enhanced imaging showed the outline of what appeared to be structures that shouldn't have existed in Antarctica in 1887. These weren't the temporary shelters or equipment caches that would have been expected from a polar expedition, but rather what looked like permanent buildings with architectural features that seemed far too advanced for the period. Helena printed out the infrared images and studied them carefully. The structures in the background appeared to be made from materials that reflected infrared light in a way that was completely different from wood, stone, or metal. Whatever these buildings were constructed from, it was something that didn't match any known construction materials from the 19th century. She was examining these images when James returned to her office, this time carrying a leather-bound journal that looked considerably older than the documents he had brought earlier. "Dr. Blackthorne," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I think you need to see this. I found it hidden in the back of Sir Charles Whitfield's private papers. It's not part of the official diary, but rather what appears to be a secret record that he kept separately." Helena accepted the journal and opened it carefully. The pages were yellowed with age, and the handwriting was less formal than in Sir Charles's official diary, as if these entries had been written in haste or under emotional stress. The first entry was dated 3 weeks after the HMS Endurance's return and began with a statement that immediately captured Helena's attention. "I can no longer remain silent about what Captain Ashworth revealed to me in confidence. The implications are too significant, and I fear that the suppression of this information may have consequences that extend far beyond the scientific community." The entry continued. According to Captain Ashworth, the expedition encountered evidence of a civilization in Antarctica, structures and technology that predate any known human settlement in that region by thousands of years. More disturbing still, they claim to have made contact with individuals who were clearly not part of their original crew, people who possessed knowledge and capabilities that cannot be explained by conventional understanding. Helena felt her hands trembling as she read these words. The secret journal was providing confirmation of the most extraordinary interpretation of the evidence she had been uncovering. The HMS Endurance expedition had apparently encountered something in Antarctica that challenged fundamental assumptions about human history and possibly about the nature of reality itself. The journal entry continued with even more startling revelations. Captain Ashworth described structures built from materials that seemed to generate their own light and heat, despite the extreme cold of the Antarctic environment. He spoke of chambers filled with devices whose purpose could not be determined, but which appeared to be in perfect working condition, despite their obvious antiquity. But it was the next passage that directly addressed the mystery of the 13th man. Most troubling of all, Captain Ashworth insisted that they had been joined during their expedition by individuals who claimed to be the original inhabitants of these structures. These people, if they can be called that, possessed an intimate knowledge of the Antarctic region and guided the expedition to discoveries that would otherwise have been impossible. Sir Charles had added a note in the margin of this entry. Ashworth's description of these individuals was deeply unsettling. He claimed they appeared human in most respects, but possessed capabilities and knowledge that suggested they were something else entirely. When I pressed him for more specific details, he became agitated and insisted that some knowledge was too dangerous to share. Helena continued reading, finding entry after entry that documented Sir Charles's growing obsession with the expedition's suppressed findings. He had apparently conducted his own investigation, reaching out to other members of the crew and attempting to piece together a complete picture of what had occurred in Antarctica. One entry, dated several months after the expedition's return, revealed that Sir Charles had managed to interview Dr. Moorcock privately. Dr. Moorcock's account corroborates Captain Ashworth's claims, though he was even more reluctant to discuss details. He did confirm that they had encountered structures of obvious artificial origin, built with technology that surpassed anything known to modern science. When I asked about the individuals who had supposedly joined their expedition, Dr. Moorcock became visibly distressed and refused to continue the conversation. The journal also contained detailed sketches that Dr. Moorcock had apparently provided to Sir Charles during their private meeting. These drawings showed architectural elements and technological devices that were completely unlike anything from the 19th century. The structures appeared to be built from a single seamless material that curved and flowed in ways that defied conventional engineering principles. One particularly detailed sketch showed what appeared to be a transportation device, a cylindrical chamber with no visible controls or power source, but with intricate patterns carved into its walls that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. According to the notes accompanying the sketch, this device had been capable of moving people and equipment across vast distances in a matter of minutes, though the mechanism by which it operated remained completely mysterious. Another sketch depicted what Dr. Moorcock had described as a communication device, a crystalline structure that could apparently transmit messages across enormous distances without any visible transmission medium. The notes indicated that this device had been used by the mysterious individuals to coordinate activities across the Antarctic continent, suggesting that the structures encountered by the HMS Endurance expedition were part of a much larger network of installations. Helena studied these sketches with growing amazement. If they were accurate representations of what the expedition had discovered, then the technology encountered in Antarctica was far beyond anything that 19th century science could have produced or even understood. The implications for human history and the development of civilization were staggering. The final entries in the secret journal documented Sir Charles's growing frustration with the conspiracy of silence surrounding the expedition. He had apparently attempted to organize a follow-up expedition to investigate the discoveries more thoroughly, but had been blocked by other members of the Royal Geographic Society's board. The last entry, dated nearly a year after the HMS Endurance's return, contained a chilling conclusion. I have come to believe that the suppression of the Antarctic discoveries is not merely a matter of scientific caution, but rather a deliberate effort to conceal information that could fundamentally alter humanity's understanding of its place in the world. The individuals encountered by the expedition, whoever or whatever they may be, clearly possess knowledge and capabilities that our civilization is not prepared to accept. Helena closed the journal and sat back in her chair, trying to process the implications of what she had read. If Sir Charles Whitfield's secret records were accurate, the HMS Endurance expedition had encountered evidence of an advanced civilization in Antarctica, a civilization that had apparently been present in that region for thousands of years before any known human exploration. The mysterious 13th man in the photograph was apparently one of these individuals, someone who had joined the expedition and guided them to discoveries that the crew had subsequently chosen to suppress. The advanced clothing and anachronistic appearance that Helena had noted in her analysis of the photograph suddenly made sense if this individual was indeed from a civilization with technology far beyond that available in 1887. But Helena was a trained historian and researcher, and extraordinary claims required extraordinary evidence. While the documentation she had uncovered was compelling, she needed to find additional corroboration before she could draw any definitive conclusions about the expedition's true discoveries. She decided to research the fate of the HMS Endurance itself, hoping to find additional clues about what had occurred during the voyage. What she discovered was that the ship had been sold to a private buyer shortly after the expedition's return, rather than being retained for future scientific voyages, as would have been expected for a vessel that had proven suitable for polar exploration. More intriguingly, the ship had been purchased by a consortium of investors whose identities were concealed behind a complex web of legal entities and shell companies. The HMS Endurance had subsequently been refitted once again, this time for what the records described as private research voyages to undisclosed locations. Helena traced the ship's ownership through several transfers over the following decades, finding that it had consistently been owned by organizations with connections to advanced scientific research, but always operating under conditions of extreme secrecy. The vessel had finally been scrapped in 1923, the same year that Captain Ashworth had died, with all of its equipment and documentation reportedly destroyed. The pattern of secrecy and suppression surrounding anything connected to the 1887 expedition was becoming increasingly clear. Someone or some organization had gone to considerable lengths to ensure that the expedition's true discoveries remained hidden from public knowledge. Helena's investigation took an unexpected turn when James discovered additional documentation in the Royal Geographic Society's archives. Hidden among routine administrative papers, he found correspondence between Sir Charles Whitfield and several prominent scientists of the era, including Lord Kelvin and Charles Darwin himself. The letters revealed that Sir Charles had attempted to share some of the expedition's discoveries with leading scientific minds of the time, hoping to gain support for further investigation. The responses he received were uniformly negative, but not for the reasons Helena had expected. Rather than dismissing Sir Charles's claims as fantasy or delusion, the scientists who responded seemed genuinely disturbed by the implications of what he was describing. Lord Kelvin's response was particularly revealing. The discoveries you describe, if accurate, would necessitate a complete revision of our understanding of natural philosophy. The social and religious implications of such revelations would be catastrophic. I must strongly advise against any public disclosure of this information. Charles Darwin's response was even more direct. The evidence you present challenges not only our understanding of human history, but our fundamental assumptions about the development of life on Earth. Such knowledge, released prematurely, could undermine the very foundations of scientific progress. Some truths are too dangerous for public consumption. These letters provided Helena with crucial insight into the motivations behind the suppression of the expedition's discoveries. It wasn't simply a matter of protecting reputations or maintaining institutional authority, but rather a genuine concern that the revelations would be too disruptive for society to absorb. Helena also discovered that Sir Charles had attempted to contact scientists in other countries, hoping to find someone willing to investigate his claims. His correspondence with researchers in Germany, France, and Russia revealed a consistent pattern of initial interest, followed by abrupt withdrawal, often accompanied by warnings about the dangers of pursuing such research. One letter from a German physicist was particularly ominous. I have consulted with colleagues about the matters you describe, and we are unanimous in our conclusion that such investigations should not be pursued. There are forces at work that extend beyond national boundaries, forces that are committed to ensuring that certain knowledge remains hidden. For your own safety, I advise you to abandon this line of inquiry. Helena began to realize that the suppression of the HMS Endurance discoveries was part of a much larger pattern of concealment that extended across international boundaries and involved some of the most prominent scientists of the 19th century. The conspiracy was far more extensive and sophisticated than she had initially imagined. Her research was interrupted by an unexpected phone call. The caller identified himself as Dr. Marcus Thornfield from the Antarctic Research Institute, and he claimed to have information relevant to her research into the HMS Endurance expedition. "Dr. Blackthorne," he said, his voice carrying a note of urgency, "I understand that you've been investigating the 1887 Antarctic expedition. I believe we need to meet in person to discuss what you've discovered. There are aspects of this case that extend far beyond historical research." Helena was initially skeptical of the call, but Dr. Thornfield provided specific details about her research that suggested he had legitimate knowledge of the expedition. He also mentioned that he represented an organization that had been monitoring discoveries related to Antarctic exploration for over a century. They arranged to meet the following day at a private club in central London, a location that Dr. Thornfield assured her would provide the privacy necessary for their discussion. Helena spent the rest of the day preparing for the meeting, organizing her evidence, and considering what questions she wanted to ask. The club where they met was an elegant establishment that catered to academics and researchers, with a library and reading rooms that provided an appropriate setting for scholarly discussion. Dr. Thornfield proved to be a distinguished gentleman in his 60s, with the bearing of someone accustomed to dealing with sensitive information. After they had settled in a private alcove, Dr. Thornfield began by confirming that Helena's research had indeed uncovered genuine evidence of extraordinary discoveries made during the 1887 expedition. He explained that he represented a consortium of researchers and institutions that had been tracking and, when necessary, suppressing information about certain Antarctic discoveries for over a century. Dr. Blackthorne, he said, what you've discovered about the HMS Endurance expedition is accurate, but it represents only a small portion of a much larger pattern of discoveries that have been made in Antarctica over the past 150 years. The continent contains evidence of civilizations and technologies that predate known human history by thousands of years, and there are compelling reasons why this information has been kept from public knowledge. Helena listened as Dr. Thornfield explained that multiple expeditions over the decades had encountered similar evidence of advanced civilizations in Antarctica. The structures and technology discovered by the HMS Endurance crew were apparently part of a vast complex of installations that extended across much of the continent, hidden beneath the ice and accessible only through specific entry points. The individuals who had joined the 1887 expedition, including the mysterious 13th man in the photograph, were apparently representatives of these ancient civilizations. According to Dr. Thornfield, these people possessed technology and knowledge that far exceeded anything available to modern science, but they had chosen to remain hidden from the broader human population for reasons that weren't entirely clear. Dr. Thornfield showed Helena additional photographs and documents that provided evidence of other expeditions that had encountered similar phenomena. There were images of structures built from unknown materials, devices that appeared to function without any visible power source, and individuals whose appearance and capabilities suggested they were not entirely human in the conventional sense. One particularly striking photograph showed a group of explorers from a 1923 expedition standing next to what appeared to be a massive crystalline structure that rose from the Antarctic ice like a frozen cathedral. The structure was clearly artificial, with geometric patterns and architectural elements that were completely unlike anything from human civilization, yet it appeared to be perfectly preserved despite the harsh Antarctic conditions. Another photograph, taken during a 1934 expedition, showed what appeared to be a transportation tunnel carved through solid ice, with walls that seemed to emit their own light. The tunnel extended beyond the range of the expedition's lighting equipment, disappearing into the distance with no visible end. But perhaps most remarkable were the photographs of the individuals who had made contact with these expeditions. Like the mysterious 13th man from the 1887 photograph, these people appeared human in most respects, but possessed subtle differences that suggested they were something else entirely. Their clothing was consistently anachronistic. Their physical condition seemed unaffected by the harsh Antarctic environment, and their eyes held a depth of knowledge that seemed impossible for any human to possess. Dr. Thornfield explained that these individuals had consistently demonstrated capabilities that defied conventional understanding. They could navigate the Antarctic landscape with perfect accuracy despite the absence of landmarks. They seemed immune to the extreme cold that affected human explorers, and they possessed knowledge of the continent's geography that extended far beyond what any human exploration had achieved. Most significantly, these individuals had consistently demonstrated the ability to predict weather patterns and ice conditions with uncanny accuracy, allowing them to guide human expeditions to safety when they would otherwise have been lost. Several expeditions had survived only because of the intervention of these mysterious guides, though the rescued explorers had typically been sworn to secrecy about their experiences. Helena found herself struggling to accept the scope of what Dr. Thornfield was describing. The idea that there had been a century-long conspiracy to suppress evidence of advanced civilizations in Antarctica seemed almost too extraordinary to believe, yet the documentation he provided appeared to be genuine. Dr. Thornfield continued by explaining that the suppression of this information had not been arbitrary or malicious, but rather a carefully considered response to the potential consequences of revelation. Early attempts to share these discoveries with the scientific community had resulted in social and political upheaval that threatened the stability of entire governments. He showed Helena documents from the early 20th century that described the aftermath of a failed attempt to publicize Antarctic discoveries. A group of scientists had attempted to present evidence of advanced civilizations to the International Geographic Congress in 1911, but their presentation had been met with such skepticism and ridicule that several of the researchers had suffered complete professional ruin. More seriously, the attempted revelation had apparently triggered a series of international incidents as various governments had attempted to claim sovereignty over the Antarctic discoveries. The potential for military conflict over access to advanced technology had been so significant that an emergency international conference had been convened to establish protocols for managing Antarctic exploration. The result had been the creation of a secret international organization, known only as the Antarctic Preservation Society, which was tasked with monitoring and controlling access to the continent's most sensitive discoveries. This organization had operated in complete secrecy for over a century, coordinating with governments and scientific institutions to ensure that information about advanced civilizations remained hidden from public knowledge. Dr. Thornfield explained that Helena's research had attracted the attention of the Antarctic Preservation Society because of the thoroughness and accuracy of her analysis. The organization had been monitoring her investigation from the beginning, and they had concluded that she possessed the skills and discretion necessary to contribute to their ongoing research efforts. He offered her the opportunity to join the Society's research team, which would provide access to a vast archive of suppressed information about Antarctic discoveries, but would also require her to agree to maintain the secrecy that had protected this information for over a century. The decision would not be taken lightly, as membership in the Society was a lifetime commitment that would fundamentally alter her relationship with the academic community. Helena requested time to consider the offer, and Dr. Thornfield agreed to give her a week to make her decision. As they parted, he provided her with a secure communication method that would allow her to contact him when she was ready to respond. That evening, Helena returned to her office at the museum and sat alone with the original photograph that had started her investigation. She studied the face of the mysterious 13th man, now knowing that he was apparently a representative of a civilization that had existed in Antarctica for thousands of years before any known human exploration of that continent. The implications of what she had discovered were staggering. If Dr. Thornfield's claims were accurate, then human understanding of history, technology, and humanity's place in the world was fundamentally incomplete. The existence of advanced civilizations that had remained hidden from mainstream knowledge suggested that there were aspects of reality that were far more complex and mysterious than anyone had imagined. Helena found herself facing a choice that would determine the direction of the rest of her career and possibly her life. She could accept Dr. Thornfield's offer and gain access to information that would revolutionize her understanding of human history, but she would also become part of a conspiracy that had kept this knowledge hidden from the world for over a century. Alternatively, she could attempt to publish her findings about the HMS Endurance expedition, but she suspected that doing so would result in the suppression of her research and possibly the destruction of her career. The pattern of secrecy and concealment that had surrounded these discoveries for over a century suggested that there were powerful forces committed to maintaining the status quo. As she considered her options, Helena realized that her investigation had led her to a crossroads that extended far beyond academic research. The photograph of the 1887 expedition crew, with its mysterious 13th man, had opened a door to knowledge that challenged fundamental assumptions about reality itself. During the week that followed her meeting with Dr. Thornfield, Helena conducted additional research into the Antarctic Preservation Society and its activities over the past century. Using her access to various academic databases and historical archives, She was able to piece together a partial picture of the organization's influence on Antarctic exploration and scientific research. She discovered that many of the most famous Antarctic expeditions of the 20th century had been secretly guided or influenced by the Society. The routes taken by explorers, the locations of their research stations, and even the timing of their expeditions had often been determined by the Society's knowledge of where sensitive discoveries were most likely to be made. The Society had also been instrumental in establishing the Antarctic Treaty System, the international agreements that governed scientific research and territorial claims on the continent. While the public justification for these treaties was environmental protection and peaceful scientific cooperation, Helena realized that their true purpose was to provide legal framework for controlling access to the continent's most sensitive areas. Helena also discovered that the Society had been involved in the recruitment and training of Antarctic researchers for decades. Many of the scientists who had conducted research in Antarctica had been carefully selected for their discretion and reliability, and they had often been briefed on the need to report any unusual discoveries through special channels rather than through normal academic publications. The more Helena learned about the Society's activities, the more impressed she became with the sophistication and effectiveness of their operations. They had managed to maintain secrecy about extraordinary discoveries for over a century, while simultaneously advancing legitimate scientific research and exploration. But Helena also began to understand the personal cost of involvement with the Society. She found records of researchers who had joined the organization and subsequently disappeared from public academic life, their careers apparently redirected toward classified research that could never be published or discussed openly. The choice facing Helena was not simply between revelation and concealment, but between two fundamentally different approaches to knowledge and its responsibilities. The Society represented a philosophy that some knowledge was too dangerous for public consumption and required careful management by qualified experts. The alternative was a commitment to open scientific inquiry and public access to information, regardless of the potential consequences. After a week of careful consideration, Helena made her decision. She contacted Dr. Thornfield and agreed to join the Antarctic Preservation Society's research efforts. The opportunity to access a century's worth of suppressed discoveries was too valuable to pass up, even if it meant becoming part of the conspiracy that had kept this information hidden. Dr. Thornfield arranged for Helena to visit a secure research facility located in an undisclosed location outside London. The facility was housed in what appeared to be a renovated country estate, but Helena quickly realized that the building had been extensively modified to accommodate advanced research equipment and secure storage for sensitive materials. The facility contained archives that documented Antarctic discoveries dating back to the early 19th century, including detailed records of expeditions that had never appeared in any public documentation. Helena spent her first week at the facility simply trying to comprehend the scope of the information that had been collected over the decades. The archives contained thousands of photographs, many showing structures and technology that were clearly beyond human capability to produce. There were detailed technical drawings of devices whose function could only be guessed at, and extensive notes from researchers who had attempted to understand the principles behind the advanced technology they had encountered. Helena was particularly fascinated by a series of reports from expeditions that had encountered what appeared to be active installations, structures that were not merely preserved ruins, but functioning facilities that continued to operate despite their obvious antiquity. These reports described chambers that maintained perfect environmental conditions, without any visible heating or cooling systems, transportation devices that could move people and equipment across vast distances instantaneously, and communication systems that could transmit information across the entire Antarctic continent. The individuals who operated these installations, including the mysterious 13th man from the 1887 photograph, were apparently the descendants of civilizations that had flourished in Antarctica, when the continent had a more temperate climate thousands of years ago. When climate change had made the surface uninhabitable, these civilizations had moved underground, creating the vast complex of installations that modern expeditions had occasionally discovered. According to the archived records, these ancient civilizations possessed technology that could manipulate matter and energy in ways that seemed to violate known physical laws. They had apparently achieved a level of scientific advancement that allowed them to maintain their underground cities for thousands of years, completely independent of surface conditions. But perhaps most intriguingly, the records suggested that these civilizations had been monitoring human development for centuries, occasionally intervening in subtle ways to guide or protect human exploration efforts. The individuals who had joined various expeditions over the decades were apparently part of this monitoring effort, ensuring that human discoveries of their installations were managed in ways that wouldn't lead to larger conflicts. Helena's research into these archived records provided answers to many of the questions that had emerged from her investigation of the HMS Endurance expedition, but it also raised new questions about the relationship between these ancient civilizations and modern humanity. The suppression of information about these discoveries appeared to be a collaborative effort between human governments and the ancient civilizations themselves, designed to prevent conflicts that could be catastrophic for both sides. As Helena delved deeper into the archives, she discovered that the photograph she had originally analyzed was just one of hundreds of similar images documenting contact between human expeditions and representatives of the ancient civilizations. Each photograph told a story of discovery and subsequent suppression, as expedition leaders struggled to understand encounters that challenged everything they thought they knew about the world. The pattern was consistent across more than a century of exploration. Expeditions would encounter evidence of the ancient installations, make contact with their inhabitants, and then return to civilization with discoveries that were too extraordinary to share publicly. The individuals who had these experiences were often traumatized by the implications of what they had learned, leading to the pattern of withdrawal and silence that Helena had observed among the survivors of the HMS Endurance expedition. But Helena also discovered that not all of these encounters had ended peacefully. The archives contained records of several expeditions that had attempted to exploit their discoveries for military or commercial purposes, leading to conflicts that had resulted in the complete disappearance of entire expedition teams. The ancient civilizations apparently possessed defensive capabilities that could eliminate threats without leaving any trace of what had occurred. These records explained why the suppression of Antarctic discoveries had been so thorough and effective. It wasn't simply a matter of human governments concealing information from their populations, but rather a collaborative effort to prevent conflicts that could result in the destruction of human exploration efforts and possibly much more. Helena spent months studying the archived materials, gradually building a comprehensive understanding of the hidden history of Antarctic exploration. She learned about technologies that could reshape matter at the molecular level, transportation systems that could move objects across vast distances instantaneously, and energy sources that appeared to draw power from fundamental forces of the universe itself. The ancient civilizations had apparently developed beyond the conflicts and competitions that characterized human civilization, achieving a level of cooperation and sustainability that had allowed them to thrive for thousands of years in one of the most hostile environments on Earth. Their technology was based on principles that human science was only beginning to understand, utilizing quantum effects and dimensional manipulation that were far beyond current human capability. But perhaps most significantly, Helena learned about the philosophical and ethical frameworks that guided the ancient civilizations. These societies had apparently developed beyond the need for territorial expansion or resource competition, instead focusing on the preservation and advancement of knowledge for its own sake. The representatives of these civilizations who had made contact with human expeditions, including the mysterious 13th man from the 1887 photograph, were apparently part of a careful program of cultural exchange designed to gradually prepare humanity for eventual open contact. The suppression of information about these encounters was intended to prevent premature revelation that could lead to social upheaval or military conflicts. Helena's work with the Antarctic Preservation Society eventually led to her participation in a modern expedition to Antarctica, where she was able to visit some of the installations that had been discovered by earlier explorers. The experience of seeing these ancient structures firsthand was both awe-inspiring and humbling, as she realized the vast scope of knowledge and capability that humanity had yet to achieve. The installations were built from materials that seemed to be alive in some sense, responding to the presence of visitors and adapting their configuration to provide optimal environmental conditions. The technology that powered these structures was completely invisible, yet provided heating, lighting, and atmospheric control that maintained perfect comfort despite the extreme cold of the Antarctic surface. The architecture of the installations was unlike anything from human civilization, with curved walls and flowing spaces that seemed to follow organic principles rather than geometric ones. The structures appeared to have been grown rather than built, with no visible joints or construction seams, as if they had been formed from a single continuous material. Most remarkably, Helena was able to meet some of the individuals whose ancestors had made contact with human expeditions over the past century. These people appeared human in most respects, but possessed capabilities and knowledge that demonstrated the vast gap between their civilization and modern human society. Through careful translation and cultural exchange, Helena learned that these ancient civilizations viewed themselves as guardians of knowledge that humanity would eventually be ready to receive and utilize responsibly. The gradual revelation of their existence through controlled contact with selected expeditions was part of a long-term plan to prepare human civilization for a future of cooperation and shared advancement. The mysterious 13th man from the 1887 photograph had been part of this program, joining the HMS Endurance expedition to guide their discoveries and assess humanity's readiness for broader contact. The traumatic reaction of the expedition members to their encounters had demonstrated that human civilization was not yet prepared for open revelation, leading to the decision to maintain secrecy for at least another generation. Helena learned that the ancient civilizations possessed detailed knowledge of human history and development. Having observed human societies for thousands of years, they understood the patterns of conflict and cooperation that characterized human civilization, and they had carefully designed their contact program to minimize the risk of triggering destructive responses. The technology that these civilizations possessed could solve many of the problems facing modern humanity, from energy production to environmental restoration to space exploration. But they had concluded that premature revelation of this technology could lead to conflicts that would be catastrophic for both human and ancient civilizations. Helena's research and experiences provided her with a unique perspective on human history and the future of human civilization. She understood that the knowledge and technology possessed by the ancient Antarctic civilizations could revolutionize human society, but she also understood the wisdom of the gradual approach that had been adopted by both the ancient civilizations and the human organizations that worked with them. The implications of discovering that humanity was not alone, and that there were civilizations with vastly superior capabilities that had been present on Earth for thousands of years, were indeed too significant to reveal without careful preparation. The social, religious, and political upheaval that could result from such revelations could potentially destroy the stability of human civilization. Helena continued her work with the Antarctic Preservation Society for several more years, contributing to the ongoing effort to document and understand the discoveries that had been made in Antarctica over the past century and a half. She also participated in the careful planning for eventual revelation of this information to the broader human population when the time was deemed appropriate. The Society had developed sophisticated models for predicting the social and political consequences of various revelation scenarios, and they were constantly monitoring global conditions to identify the optimal timing for disclosure. The goal was to reveal the existence of the ancient civilizations in a way that would promote cooperation and advancement rather than conflict and exploitation. Helena also became involved in the Society's educational programs, which were designed to gradually prepare selected individuals for eventual contact with the ancient civilizations. These programs involved careful psychological screening and extensive training in the philosophical and ethical principles that guided the ancient societies. The photograph that had started her investigation remained in her office, a reminder of the moment when her understanding of reality had been fundamentally transformed. The mysterious 13th man continued to gaze out from the image, his presence serving as a bridge between two civilizations. that were slowly working toward a future of cooperation and mutual advancement. Helena often reflected on the irony that one of the most significant discoveries in human history had been hidden in plain sight, preserved in a photograph that had sat in museum archives for over a century. The image had contained evidence of contact between human explorers and representatives of an ancient civilization, but it had taken modern analytical techniques and careful research to reveal the true significance of what had been captured by that 1887 photographer. As she considered the future, Helena understood that her generation was likely to be among the last to live with the knowledge of the ancient civilizations as a closely guarded secret. The careful preparation that had been ongoing for over a century was approaching a point where broader revelation might become possible, potentially transforming human understanding of history, technology, and humanity's place in the universe. The ancient civilizations had apparently reached a consensus that human civilization was approaching a level of maturity that might allow for open contact within the next few decades. The development of global communication systems, international cooperation frameworks, and advanced scientific understanding had created conditions that were more favorable for revelation than had existed in previous generations. Helena's work contributed to the ongoing assessment of humanity's readiness for contact, and she participated in the development of protocols for managing the revelation process when it eventually occurred. The goal was to ensure that the disclosure would promote scientific advancement and international cooperation, rather than triggering conflicts over access to advanced technology. The story of the HMS Endurance expedition and its mysterious 13th crew member would eventually become part of a much larger narrative about the hidden history of human exploration and the gradual revelation of knowledge that had been preserved by ancient civilizations for thousands of years. But for now it remained a secret, known only to a select few, a testament to the extraordinary discoveries that could be hidden within a single historical photograph. Helena's investigation had begun with a simple question about a discrepancy in historical records, but it had led her to discoveries that challenged fundamental assumptions about reality itself. The mysterious 13th man in the 1887 expedition photograph had been the key to unlocking a hidden chapter of human history, one that would eventually reshape humanity's understanding of its past and its future. The ancient civilizations continued their patient watch over human development, occasionally intervening in subtle ways to guide exploration and discovery. Their representatives, like the mysterious 13th man, served as bridges between two worlds, carrying knowledge across the centuries and preparing for a future when both civilizations could work together openly. As Helena continued her research, she discovered that the pattern of contact and concealment extended far beyond Antarctic exploration. The ancient civilizations had apparently been involved in guiding human development in many areas, from scientific discovery to technological advancement to social evolution. Their influence had been subtle but persistent, helping to steer humanity toward a future where open contact would be possible. The photograph of the 1887 expedition crew, with its mysterious 13th man, represented just one moment in this long history of hidden contact. But it was a crucial moment, one that had demonstrated both the potential for cooperation between the civilizations and the need for continued secrecy until humanity was fully prepared for the truth. Helena understood that her role in this ongoing story was to help prepare for that eventual revelation, contributing to the careful work of building bridges between two civilizations that had shared the same planet for thousands of years without open acknowledgement. The mysterious 13th man in the photograph had begun that work over a century ago, and Helena was honored to continue it in her own time.